Welcome to the Mental Insights Podcast, a conversation aimed at understanding all sides of mental health, addiction recovery, and homelessness. Each interview will include one's personal experiences and insights, or an expert's advice and knowledge within one of these fields. The goal is to promote awareness, guidance, and support for anyone who is affected by these challenges. Thank you all for listening. Welcome to the Mental Insights Podcast. This is your host, Brendan.cutuli. We are here today for Season 2, Episode number 10 with Joshua Shea. Joshua Shea is a recovering pornography addict and the author of The Addiction Nobody Will Talk About: How I Let My Pornography Addiction Hurt People and Destroy Relationships. Joshua recently released He's a Porn Addict, Now What? In late 2019. He was a prominent magazine publisher, award-winning journalist, film festival founder, and politician in Central Maine before serving 6 months in jail. Joshua launched his website in 2017 to help others who are facing similar addictions as himself. Joshua joins the Mental Insights Podcast to speak about pornography and alcohol addiction. Joshua, thank you for taking this time to speak with me today.
Well, I thank you very much for having me on the show, Brendan. These are important topics, and a lot of people just want to pretend they don't exist. So, it takes two people to have this conversation, and I thank you for being willing to have it with me today.
It's my pleasure, Joshua. I was recently speaking with a friend about how this is a topic of conversation that is not brought up enough, and I'm so thankful that you're here to take the time with me to speak about it, given that not many here are willing to do it within our society today. So I'm looking forward to this, and I can't wait to hear what my audience thinks about this conversation. To really, start this conversation and bring about what people face today, I just wanted to bring this statistic from Addiction Center that states almost 21 million Americans have at least one addiction, yet only 10% of them receive treatment. This is a staggering statistic to speak about. And, to really just bring this conversation to start, can you speak about the power of an addiction and why it's important to seek that treatment, given that only 10% are receiving that today?
Well, I think that a lot of people don't really recognize they have an addiction. They don't understand what addiction is, and they can always find somebody who has it worse. So they figure that person has set the bar, they're below it, so they don't need to get help. Addiction, whether it is pornography, alcohol, gambling, food, video games, whatever it is, it kind of all does the same thing in the brain. It serves the pleasure centers. It gives you a little flick of dopamine, sends that oxytocin running through. There's actually 6 different chemicals that are all doing a little dance in there. And with addiction, over time, you have to keep ramping up the addiction to keep hitting those pleasure centers the same, to the point where you can actually almost fry them and do permanent damage to yourself. This is what makes it a technical disease in terms of science. For people who are listening who maybe don't have an addiction, don't even have any really bad habits or don't think they do, there's one little experiment I tell everybody to run for themselves if they want to understand addiction. Take your cell phone first thing in the morning, just pick a random morning to do this. You can't really prepare it. Turn the volume on all your apps all the way up, turn all your notifications on, turn everything up, and then take a Post-it note and put it across the screen. And then keep your phone next to you all day. And every time you hear a little chime or ding, or somebody has liked something, or you get a text, or even if the phone rings, don't do anything to it. And what you're going to find is the first 1 or 2 times, it's okay, you can deal with it. But by that 3rd or 4th time, you're getting that little, oh, someone's paying attention to me. Somebody needs something. I'm being beckoned, I'm being summoned. And most people who have actually done this tell me they can't last till lunchtime, because they are so addicted to every little ding on their phone. It's like Pavlov's dogs. And that to me is the best way that I can show people addiction, because when you get to that 8th or 9th little chime and somebody's liking one of your Snapchat stories or Instagram pictures, and you can't look at it and it's killing you, that's what it feels like to try to not succumb to your addiction. to not peel off that post-it note. And that's the best way that I can explain it to people, because we seem like we're a nation that's addicted to our cell phones right now. Um, and like I said earlier, I think that most people just don't want to face the term addiction or the term addict. One of the things that I'm always out there talking about is that it's just a title, it's just a label, it's used for diagnostic purposes. Whether you call it an addiction or a compulsion or obsession or bad habit or hobby gone awry, it's what it is. You are who you are. And if you're suffering with problems, whether it's with a substance or a process behavior, you need to get help for it.
I love that comparison that you brought up within the phone, and I think many listeners should go out and do that, because that's a great comparison in terms of being able to succumb to that. And I think a lot of people will always peel that off
Yeah.
within, even before lunchtime. It's certainly something that I think many would do. And I love the consideration of, it's simply just a label, it's simply just a title. It's something that you hear about, especially within the mental health community as well. There's so many different layers of people saying, "Oh, you're defined by this, you're defined by that," when really it's just something that they're going through, and it's not something that defines them throughout their whole life. Within these topics of conversation, we're speaking about some things, especially that you said, it's kind of willing for people to hide back and to hide what they're going through, especially if it's something, as severe as any one of these addictions. I want you to share about kind of the identity of hiding an addiction, and maybe some identifications that people can notice within themselves or within people around themselves, in order to try to maybe not peel that layer back a little bit quicker, and trying to find the answer a little bit faster than, a lot of people today, like you're saying, don't even think that they have an addiction. They don't even see it within themselves. So what are some kind of identifications that are within hiding an addiction?
Well, addicts are master manipulators. And there is the term gaslighting, which is used, which basically is about making other people think that they're crazy if they bring up the fact that you have an addiction or you might have a problem, and you spin it around on them. What a lot of addicts don't recognize is that the person you gaslight the most is yourself. You make up excuses, you make up reasons, you rationalize. Uh, and one of the big signs of addiction is when you actually start making deals with yourself and promises with yourself that you won't engage in the behavior, or you'll bring down the behavior, and you can't hold on to it. So that's a big sign right there. As far as if you're trying to see it in someone else, look for them lying, look for them keeping secrets, perhaps covering things up. A lot of times there is anger or irritability if you confront them about something, because let's face it, I don't know if you have any addictions, but let's say that you are not addicted at all to gambling. And if I say to you, Brendan, I think you've got a gambling problem, you'll probably say to me, no, I don't. And you're not going to take it offensively, and, whatever. Uh, you know, and if you did have a gambling problem and I said to you, hey, Brent, I think you have a gambling problem, and you start getting very defensive about it, well, that may actually be a sign you do have a gambling problem, because that irritability and anger comes from someplace, and it's usually a place where you don't want to admit that you have it. These are a lot of the early ongoing signs, but as addictions get worse, people will start to plan their days around their addiction, and that becomes their number one priority. In being their number one priority, things like hanging out with friends, other things they used to do, whether sports, gym, watching TV, reading, these things start to disappear as the addiction takes center stage. You lose interest in the non-addictive behaviors. You start to hang around with people who are enabling your addiction, versus the kind of people who don't want you around it. And then ultimately, there's no question when you reach that critical point of addiction where it has largely taken over your life. There are problems with school, work, your interpersonal relationships, especially those closest to you, and it can cause a lot of addictions don't get stopped until you reach a breaking point with financial issues, legal issues. Unfortunately, that's when it goes too far. And a lot of what I do out there, as far as educating with both alcoholism and especially the porn addiction, is that you've got to take care of this before it gets too late. Because I got to that point where it was too late, and I've seen a lot of people, and I have a lot of good friends who got to that point where it was too late. And you don't want to get there. You want to nip this in the bud. If you are not what you believe is a real serious addict, yeah, maybe you've got a problem, maybe you've got a bad habit, but you're not a real serious addict. Thank God you're not yet. Go take care of this now before you are, because that is where you are headed.
It's great and valuable information that you just stated, and I think it's important that you're speaking about how some of these warning signs, but as well you're speaking about how there is a tipping point, and it's not something within any one of these addictions that you can just have forever and there's going to be no repercussions. You're speaking about how there's going to be some type of event that's going to bring you to some realization, and it's not going to be something that's going to bring a positive first effect towards you. It will bring maybe some change, as it has for many, but some, it's kind of this never ending cycle unless you have some severe event. For yourself, you experienced 6 months within prison, and within that, can you speak about how your state of mind was during this instance, and as well how this event transpired into you realizing what addiction truly is to yourself?
Yeah, in a tiny nutshell, you mentioned that I was very active in my community. I ran a magazine, started a film festival. I was a city councilor. I pulled myself off of my bipolar meds, which I'd been on for about 15 years, when things really started getting dicey with one of my companies, where it looked like it was going to start folding if something didn't turn around. And I thought that I could tap into a manic, creative side that was repressed by those meds. Unfortunately, once the meds were out of my system, my drinking exploded, my pornography use exploded, because my anxiety, my stress, everything that I used porn and alcohol for kind of blew up itself. So ultimately, when it came to my porn addiction, just looking at women online and on the internet and videos from your typical websites, that wasn't enough anymore. So I actually made the transition over to chat rooms. And having a background as an investigative journalist, I know how to ask people questions that are very leading. I know how to ask questions to the point where people don't think I'm asking questions when I'm asking them. And I was able to develop a system for essentially catfishing women, where they never saw my face. They would be watching a video that I found of a younger, good-looking guy typing away, and I learned how to manipulate women into taking their clothes off. Unfortunately, in early 2004, about 6 years ago, um, the state police showed up at my door and told me that one of those women that I did that to was a teenager. And I was shocked, but they laid out the evidence, and there wasn't any way that I could deny it. They had me. And it's important to point out that while I was at such a critical point in my addiction that I probably didn't recognize cause and effect and consequences well, I do take full responsibility for this. What I did was a horrible, heinous thing, and it happened because I didn't take care of my mental health. I knew that those bipolar pills kept me at an even keel, and I took myself off of them. So to fall down into that rabbit hole, that was absolutely my fault, and I really try not to minimize it or rationalize it. It wasn't one of the worst sex offender cases on earth, but nonetheless, I did something that was horrible. I exploited a teenager. And not to mention that I exploited all those women just because they were over 18. doesn't make it okay, even if it was technically legal. Um, Ultimately, there was 2 years before I was being arrested and being sentenced. During that time, I did two rehabs, one for alcohol, that was 10 weeks, one for porn and sex, that was 7 weeks. I did hundreds, if not thousands, of hours of one-on-one intense therapy here in Maine, where I live, with the therapist who remains my therapist to this day. And being the, like I said, journalist kind of bookworm type, I read everything I possibly could on it, researched everything I could. I'm the geek who likes to read studies. I did everything I could. And ironically, on the day that I went to get sentenced, I was a healthier version of myself than I'd ever been, because I'd done all that hard work in the previous 2 years in recovery. And, the judge thankfully recognized that, but you can't do what I did, especially being a community leader and someone that's so well recognized, and not be punished for it. I get that. So I served 6 months in the county jail. And one of the things that I really recognized when I was there was, after talking with a lot of the men who were there for drugs or domestic abuse or robbery, burglary type stuff, almost all of them had some sex or porn issue. And they knew why I was there, because there were stories in the newspaper about me as I was heading in. And I just didn't really keep it a secret what I was doing. And in talking with these guys, it was amazing that they were so embarrassed by their sex lives or how much pornography that they used. They were more embarrassed by that than their heroin use. They were more embarrassed by that than the fact they smacked their wives and girlfriends around. They were more embarrassed by that than the fact they held up a store. And that was really telling to me. And I looked back at when I first stepped forward and said, okay, I've got to take care of this after I was arrested. And there were not a lot of resources out there. And that's why, while I was in jail, I started writing that book after talking to all these guys and after meeting all these people in rehab, because there's a million and one books if you are an alcoholic. I found them, I read a lot of them. Same thing with drugs and a lot of these addictions, but there just wasn't anything for porn addicts. So I decided that, I know I'm the one who reads the studies, but not anybody else really does. So I would try to put something on paper that anybody who ended up in my position or deciding they wanted to turn things around could read, an easy to read piece that wasn't too academic.
Thank you for that, Joshua. And I think, we'll speak a little bit more in depth about the resources that you are providing now within these communities. But first, as you were going through this instance, and as you were, experiencing many of these other challenges people were facing, and as you're saying, they were having similar issues such as yourself, but they were hiding it compared to what they thought is their severe challenges as they were in jail. How did you learn to find faith within this time, even as you were healthy, even as you were feeling the best as you were within yourself? How were you able to find the faith to experience those 6 months and say, all right, after this instance, this is what I'm going to do?
I've always had this weird capacity to take negatives. And I don't know if it's my journalism training or I became a journalist because of this, but I have this capacity to look at a horrible thing that's happening and say, well, maybe this will be interesting. And even if something is negative, I can somehow in my mind put a spin on it that it's going to be okay or that it's interesting. And the fact is, I don't know what the percentage is, but none of my friends, none of my family members have been to jail before. I didn't know what it was like. It was a new experience. So I tried to tell myself, don't be a wise ass and get your butt kicked or say anything you shouldn't. Keep your mouth shut for a while, figure out how the place works, but this might be interesting. It sucks, I can't change it, I have to go. Make the best of it. And when I was writing my book, it was interesting because I was kind of forced into my Catholicism as a kid, like a lot of people my age were, and I walked away from it when I turned 18, and kind of I called myself jokingly a non-practicing atheist because I just didn't care. I didn't think about faith or spirituality. And when I was sitting there writing the book, I noticed that again and again, I kept mentioning that, well, at this time in my life, the universe smiled on me and did this. Or, I had no idea what I was going to say when I stepped up to that microphone at that presentation, but the universe came through and I started speaking eloquently. And it took me, a couple of weeks of writing before I realized I have an aversion to the word God, but I don't have an aversion to the word the universe. And when it comes down to it, there's really no difference. I have faith that things are going to turn out the way they should. I have faith that there is some kind of equalizing, balancing power in this world. I have faith that even if I can't tell why something seemingly horrible is happening to me right now, I will be able to make sense of it down the road. So while I don't subscribe to any specific religious text or religious dogma, it actually took being in jail and sitting down and writing and reflecting to recognize that I'm actually one of the most faith-filled people that I know.
That's incredible, Joshua. And you're speaking about having faith within the universe, but in turn, throughout those first 2 years before you experienced this, you had to find faith within yourself, within going through recovery, within saying, all right, I need to take this next step forward, unless, what could spiral downwards if I continue down this path. And, what I want to know from you is, what did you learn about the effects of, any type of addiction, whether it be porn, whether it be alcohol, and speak about the effects that it had within yourself, but as well speak about how that affected your relationships with the people around you.
Well, I it's amazing in recovery how much you look back and how many red flags you see. And as you start to understand yourself more in recovery, and I know we'll get into this more probably in the next episode, you recognize that trauma is the base of most of your addictions. And when you start to address that trauma and fix that trauma, the addictions are actually kind of easy to let go of because you don't need them anymore because you're dealing with that trauma. Um, what what I really found was that going through the recovery, it was like learning about myself and meeting myself and making connections. It was almost like my life was a uh, jigsaw puzzle, 100-piece jigsaw puzzle that I had all the pieces laid out for me, but I didn't even want to put them together. I tried to keep them apart. I kept my professional life apart from my family, and I kept my political life apart from things. And, I lived my life compartmentally, and that's not how life works. Everything is connected with each other. Your present is connected with your past, which is connected with your future. You know, you have you can't compartmentalize things. That's not healthy, and that's really that was probably the biggest thing that I learned is that all of these things have to mix together. um, I think that probably probably the most grueling part of things was just going through the almost reprogramming process. Cognitive behavioral therapy was wonderful for me. It was tough because you really have to be on your game and aware of what's going on at all times. But that's how I helped fix things. And not only did it help me fix things, it helped me recognize everything that was wrong and what was caused by the addictions and the stories that I told myself about the addictions. I mean, the reality is, when I got arrested and when I went off to my first rehab, I didn't think I had any problems or any addictions. It took me about a week to 10 days in that alcohol rehab before I stopped and recognized, hey, they're talking about me here. I'm actually this alcoholic guy they're talking about. And in fact, I check off every box. So I guess if this is what alcoholism is, I'm an alcoholic. Uh, I thought that my porn addiction was just an offshoot of the alcoholism. I just thought it was a bad decision I made during the alcoholism. It took me another 6, 7 weeks and working with a certified sex addiction therapist off campus to recognize that I actually had a porn addiction, and it even predated the alcoholism. So I think that the most important thing when you're doing recovery is you do need tools to move forward, but you've got to go back and dig deep and do that deep work and recognize how you got to be the person that you got to be. And you need to have a group of people around you, whether it's friends, family, people in a 12-step group. You've got to have people around you who are there to support you, who will not judge you, who will make you feel like you're in a safe place. Because so much of addiction is about not feeling safe. You escape with your drug of choice or your video games or your porn. It's all about escape, and you need to feel safe in reality to rebound. So, those are all little things that are part of it, because like there are so many pieces of recovery. It is putting all those pieces together and then going, oh, I see the big picture now.
You're bringing up some great points in terms of, some identifications of steps in terms of the realization and then moving forward. And, in terms of, some overarching things, you look at, there's either a major event within your life where it kind of catapults you into saying, all right, do I need to make this change? There's also when you're going through therapy or you're speaking with somebody, a counselor, to say, all right, this is what you've went through. This is kind of what it's taking to take the next step forward. First off, what you're struggling with. And I think I want you to take this time, if you were speaking to somebody, whether it was speaking to your past self or whether it's speaking to somebody who's listening right now who is facing an addiction but doesn't necessarily know that they are, or maybe that they do know but they're not willing to break outside that barrier. For what you've gone through, is there anything that can be said? Is there anything that we can do in order to break through that person's state of mind, in order to make them see that, all right, I need to take that one step, that one leap of faith to just even reach out to someone for help? Or is it simply just there has to be this, this big event, whether it's getting in trouble through some person, whether it's a partner finding out, is there anything, is there any words to be said that can help someone transition from an addiction to wanting to seek recovery?
Yeah, I guess the first thing I'd say is a lot of times, and I think the 12-step groups might lean on this a little too much, is the concept of rock bottom. And I don't like that concept because I think you can always go lower. And people will say, I'm not at my rock bottom yet. I don't need help yet. Well, to me, rock bottom is death. And once you hit death, you're not coming back. So don't be waiting for your rock bottom, number one. Number two, don't confuse yourself and believe that you are not an addict because you are not the stereotype you have in your mind of an addict. When it comes to pornography, I think that, in talking with enough people, I've learned that the stereotypical porn addict is a 19, 20-year-old guy who lives in his mom's basement and has never kissed a girl in real life. And while that may be a porn addict in one respect and one little subset, there are also women in that same position. And there are 28-year-olds and 38-year-olds and 48-year-olds and rich people and poor people, black people, Asian people, Latino people, smart people, stupid people. I have met every type of person you can imagine who is a pornography addict. And that's also true with drug addicts, with alcoholics, with gambling addicts. There is no stereotype. So don't believe you can't be an addict because you don't fall into what you believe is an addict. And then finally, I would ask you to think about my case. I was an alcoholic and a porn addict for roughly 20 to 25 years, depending on which addiction you're looking at. Now, I don't like the term functional addict because there was always a part of me that was not functional, but um, for probably 99.7% of my porn addiction, I would never have gone into a chat room and talked with women, because to me that's cheating. And I'd been married for I think 11 years at that point. But that's where my addiction led. Not only that, I'm well aware that there are 16-year-old girls who look 26 and vice versa. And I was aware of that before. I'm aware of that now. I think that maybe I got to the point where it didn't matter or it wasn't registering. But if I can get to that point, anybody can. Pillar of the community, wife, kids. I've got it going for myself and I'm managing my addictions. But it got to the point that I couldn't manage them anymore. Did I ever think it would get there? No. So if you believe you might have an addiction, but you don't need to deal with it because you kind of got it under control, believe me, it can end up not under control. If you live anywhere where it gets cold, you're a good driver until you hit a patch of ice. A lot of times you don't see that patch of ice before you hit it, and then suddenly it doesn't matter what a good driver you are, the ice is in control. And that's really what it is with addiction, where that little 0.02%, I finally hit that and I wasn't in control anymore. I really wish I would have got help for things before that, because once it's out of your control, you are kind of just watching what's going on, and it is like a car crash. You can't stop it.
Beautifully said, Joshua. I appreciate those, honest remarks about trying to uncover what you are going through as it is. So, for anybody listening, I think try to see some of those warning signs, and we will speak about further ones within the next episode. But you spoke a lot about identification, state of mind, effects of addiction, and how they can take place within our life, within how it's going, what kind of struggles can take place within this. And I think this is a good time to wrap up part one of this episode. And within the next episode, we're going to speaking more about porn addiction and some of the ways, more warning signs, some of kind of the ways you can overcome it, as well as steps in terms of what you're doing to advocate for this now. So for this being said, please be sure to check out this next episode. And I want to thank you all for listening for this first part of episode number 10, season 2 with Joshua Shea. So thank you all for being here. And thank you, Joshua, for providing this information so far.
And again, thank you for having me. I appreciate the platform to share this stuff.
Thank you all for listening to today's episode of the Mental Insights Podcast. Make sure to reach out to today's guest or myself if you need any advice, guidance, or support in your life today. Please be sure to like, subscribe, and review to this podcast so we know what you thought of this episode. I look forward to being in touch with you all in the next episode. I hope you all have a wonderful day.